Good morning, Holy Yidden. How are you? Today, welcome. Thank you for joining us for our daily Gemara Chabura. Today is the final non-Rosh Chodesh day of Tishrei, Chaf Tes Tishrei, October 24th. We're studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Presently, Masechet Shabbat, chapter 19. We're towards the end of chapter 19. We are on Kuf Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph. That's 137a. As you may recall, our previous discussion was all about what do you do, how do you do a bris on Shabbos? It's actually Hashgacha Pratis. Today, Be'ezer Hashem, after the Gemara shir, one of the dear members of one of our families of our shul has a bris, and so we'll be able to. So everything's connected. And then Dr. Stamler also noted there was a Vachnach, and there's different traditions behind the Vachnach. There's deep spiritual significance, but there's also a theme of protection. And of course, our Gemara talks, unfortunately, a lot about the flip side, which is the vulnerability that a baby inherently had for all 30 days. And that was the exhaustive discussion that we had last week and the week prior, and throughout the holidays. And now we started a new Mishnah. As you may recall, I want to look through the Mishnah real fast, if I could find it, and then we will resume with the Gemara. So we talked about different scenarios where there was two babies and the wrong baby was circumcised, and by virtue of circumcising the wrong baby, there were halachic complications. What kind of halachic complications could happen when you mix up the baby? And again, I proposed that maybe we were talking about twins that were born on the cusp of one before twilight, one after twilight, which would explain a most reasonable scenario for a mix-up. Maybe there are other scenarios. Maybe the moyel comes to town and all the babies are brought into some kind of preparatory waiting space. We could brainstorm and imagine different scenarios that might lead to this problem. But our Mishnah is talking about, I'm going to read the Mishnah again, and then we'll skip to what we're up to. There were two children waiting for their bris. Echad lomol achar Shabbos. One whose bris is to be done on Sunday. The echad lomol b'Shabbos, and one of those babies was to have a bris on Shabbos. V'shachach umol eshel achar haShabbos b'Shabbos. And then the baby who is not old enough doesn't warrant yet a bris because the bris needs to be at 8 days. And this baby, let's say, is 7 days old, and they gave the baby a bris. Chayiv, there is liability. Chayiv for what? Usually chayiv means chayiv chatas. Obviously, the moyel didn't do this intentionally; it was unintentionally. But he made a mistake. And what was the problem? By giving a bris to a baby who does not need a bris, we are essentially being mechalel Shabbos. This is chilul Shabbos. You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to give a bris on Shabbos unless there's the mitzvah of bris, because the act of bris, when it's not a mitzvah, is causing an injury, drawing blood, which is prohibited on Shabbos. And so the baby that had the circumcision didn't have a mitzvah to have a bris. Therefore, the act was not a mitzvah that is given a license to be done on Shabbos. Therefore, there was chilul Shabbos, and therefore the Mishnah here says chayiv. What we're going to notice in a moment is there were two different versions of this Mishnah, or two different traditions about the halacha of this Mishnah. One version that read chayiv, and shockingly enough, another version or another opinion that actually reads patur. And so today's Gemara is going to probe 3 or 2.5 different ways of understanding the Mishnah and going through all of the different specifics. But scenario one, you have two babies and you give the young baby, the non-qualifying baby, a bris. Chayiv. The Mishnah says you're chayiv. Scenario B. Echad lomol be'erev Shabbos. Echad lomol b'Shabbos. Now you have a baby who is 8 days old and a baby who is 9 days old. V'shachach umol eshel erev Shabbos b'Shabbos. The baby who ought to have had a bris on Shabbos, didn't have a bris on Friday, received the bris on Shabbos. So what's the problem? Well, the license to do a bris on Shabbos is only an 8-day-old baby. If the baby is not 8 days old, even though halacha maybe says you should wait, we do not administer the bris on Shabbos. The bris will be administered on Sunday. And indeed, the next Mishnah that we're going to study after this is going to talk about all the days and most of the days and scenarios wherein one might end up giving a bris. 8 days, 9 days, and so forth. So again, Shabbos. Hold on one second. One baby on Shabbos is 8 days old, one is 9 days old. Only the 8-day-old baby gets the bris on Shabbos. The 9-day-old baby has to wait till day 10, Sunday, and he mixed them up. Now there's a machlokes. Rabbi Eliezer Mechayev. Rabbi Eliezer says, ultimately, what you did was an unlicensed bris. You bring a chatos. Rabbi Yeshua pointed. Rabbi Yeshua says, no, you were engaged in a mitzvah. You did a mitzvah. Admittedly, not 100% the way it should have been. You're potter. That's the Mishnah. Rebbe Errol?
Rabbi, are we to learn from this that if a bris for some reason is delayed, we should do it as soon as possible?
Usually, yes, with the exception of a delayed bris will never happen on Shabbos.
Right.
The only time that a bris will occur on Shabbos is if it's the 8th day of the baby. A baby is jaundiced, or the male misses his flight, or the baby misses his flight, or whatever the scenario might be. The bris will not happen on day 8. The bris will not happen, on day 9. It won't happen on Shabbos. It'll happen on Sunday. Again, no such scenario besides for day 8 where a bris happens on Shabbos. And again, we're going to see the next Mishnah. We'll see a lot more of this specific discussion about it. So that's our Mishnah, 2 scenarios. A baby that's 7 days old and 8 days old is scenario A. A baby that's 8 days old and 9 days old, scenario B. And the Mishnah gives a different halachic opinion in each case. If the baby who got the bris was utterly not meant to have a bris, chayiv. But if the baby was supposed to have a bris, just not today, the baby should have had a bris yesterday, and the baby is going to have a bris tomorrow, there's a machlokes. Elazar says chayiv, Yeshua says pater. These are the 2 Mishnahs that we studied on Friday. Now, we're going, hold on, I don't think, did I hit record? Yeah, it's recording, okay. All right, so now let's see the Gemara. And I'm sorry, any other comments or questions before we jump into the Gemara? And while we're talking, let's say that we're going to dedicate today's bris. We're going to dedicate today's learning to the young unnamed man of the Schwartz family who's going to be having a bris today. And we'll honor the whole Schwartz family. They should have a lot of simcha and nachas, and our community should always be busy with simcha. And so, I can't dedicate the bris. That's not up to me, but I can dedicate the shir. So let's do that. Rav Huna Masni. So here we get into an interesting scenario. Rav Huna Masni Chayev. Remember, the Mishnah was originally an oral product. And even when it was written down, maybe there were different additions. And so, Rav Huna Masni Chayiv, when Rav Huna would teach this Mishnah, he would read the following. Misha the next word was Chayiv. That's how Rav Huna's Mishnah read, which is good news because that's how our Mishnah reads. But there's a problem. Rav Yehuda Masni Pater. Rabbi Yehuda read differently. He said the Mishnah doesn't say Chayiv, the Mishnah says Pater. So again, baby for day 7 got a bris a day early on Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda would read over here instead of Chayiv, his Mishnah read Pater. So we have a debate about the very language of our Mishnah. But of course, the debate does not end with the question of language. The debate has a very, very different halachic significance. Chayiv and Pater are about as diametrically opposed as you could find in a halachic conversation. So what do you make? What are we to make of this debate?
Rabbi, do we have the Mishnahs that read Pater? Or we only have a reference?
So really the question is, well, anyways, I'm sorry, go ahead. Do we have a Mishnah that reads differently? We don't have that variant Mishnah. No, I don't believe so. But
Because-
in the time of the Gemara, there were different.
Yeah, but normally this is part of the Gemara where they say this one says this and this one says that. Why
But here
we have conflicting Mishnahs? It's
I'll explain to you. You're asking a good question. You're asking, isn't it usual? Isn't it normal for a Gemara to have a debate of rabbis? What's so unique about this issue? I'll explain to you what's unique. Sages of the Gemara don't argue with a Mishnah. So Rabbi Yehuda cannot say, I disagree with a Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda being a member of the Amoraim, meaning he lived after the era of the Mishnah, he is not allowed, which is not to be confused with Rabbi Yehuda, who is a sage of the Mishnah. But Rabbi Yehuda is not allowed to. What do you mean allowed to? There's no framework for Rabbi Yehuda to disagree with the Mishnah. So Rabbi Yehuda can't argue with the Mishnah. But what he has is something even worse. He has a different tradition of the Mishnah. So he's not arguing with the Mishnah. He says, my Mishnah reads as follows. Now, I'm not saying that he did this as a loophole. It's just to understand the nature of the question. It would not be possible for him to argue with the Mishnah, but it is incredibly possible for him to have a different version. So let's read. Well, let's see how Rashi explains this.
Is this unique?
Well, let's see how Rashi reads the Gemara, and then we'll understand a little better. I said it in one way, but let's see if Rashi agrees with me. Rav Huna masni b'masnisim b'reisha. The way Rav Yehuna. So Rashi learns the Gemara a little differently than I just explained it to you. Let's see. I told you that there's two different versions of the Mishnah. That's Rabbi Steinsaltz's explanation here. You see, there's a dispute regarding the correct version of our Mishnah. That's a very black and white way of explaining this Gemara's debate. Let's read Rashi. Rav Huna Masni, and that's the literal translation of the words. Bimasnisin bereisha, Rav Huna reads our Mishnah to state chayiv, and when it says chayiv, l'divrei hakol, it means this is a unanimous. Everyone, all the sages agree. Kidetaninon la anon, and this is what our Mishnah reads. Our Mishnah reads, there's one opinion, there's one halach. But Rav Yehuda Masni bereisha pater. To mukila b'shachach, Umal es shel erev Shabbos b'Shabbos. The way Rav Yehuda learns this, excuse me, that you forgot and circumcised a baby. Demuki la b'shachach umal es shel erev Shabbos b'Shabbos. He understands the ratio to be talking about that an Erev Shabbos baby was circumcised. Upluktehi b'shel acher Shabbos b'Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda says, you know what? The machlokes is all about. Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rashi, as I understand it, reads our Mishnah differently. He says everybody agrees that you're pater for scenario B, and the whole machlokes is in scenario A. So he has a whole different Mishnah, according to the way I understand Rashi. The Mishnah reads very differently. The Mishnah reads that there is a unanimous agreement. When? Because this is how the Gemara is going to eventually have to explain this. There is agreement about the case of an older baby, and the machlokes is about a baby that's early for the bris. So that's how I believe how Rabbi Yehuda learns this. Explains this Gemara. Let's read Rabbi Steinsaltz one more time. Rabbi Yehuda teaches the first clause as stating exempt. But I think Rashi reads this argument a little bit differently. That Rav Huna says that everybody agrees that you're chayiv, and there's a debate about the second scenario, and Rabbi Yehuda says everybody agrees in the second scenario that pater, and in the first scenario chayiv. So, but I'm going to stick right now with Rabbi Steinsaltz's translation. Two versions of the Mishnah, one that is very strict, one, Rabbi Yehuda's version, that's very lenient. Even though you gave a bris to a baby that was not meant to have a bris, nonetheless you're chayiv. Now the Gemara, so I maybe confused you just now, but don't worry. We have two versions of the Mishnah, and the Gemara is going to address the first version first, which is our version, and then the Gemara is going to probe and think through Rav Yehuda's way of reading the Mishnah. So if you're confused, fear not. The Gemara is going to give us a chance to reorient ourselves and to review Rav Huna's opinion and Rav Yehuda's opinion. So first, we're going to review Rav Huna's opinion. Rav Huna Masni Chayiv. Rav Huna reads our Mishnah to say Chayiv, that if you gave a 7-day-old baby a bris on Shabbos, forget that maybe there's a problem with the bris. That's another question. But you did Chilul Shabbos. You cut, you bled, which are generally not things that can be done on Shabbos, in a scenario where there is no mitzvah. Rav Huna Masni Chayiv. Let's read Rashi. He explains what's the chiddush. The afagav the Torah the mitzvah. Although in actuality the moil was hired to do a mitzvah, he is going to do a mitzvah. The ta'aba, and there was a mistake. But kivan the lav mitzvah, being that there is no mitzvah, shadayin lo higi as mane lamu. The baby does not have a mitzvah to have a bris at 7 days. Chayiv, he is chayiv. So Rashi explains what's even the chiddush. The chiddush is I would think maybe the moil should be off the hook. He has very good intentions. But sometimes intentions are not enough. Now, we're not saying that he is chayiv for doing an intentional sin. He is chayiv for a chatas, for an inadvertent avera. On what basis is he so confident? Is there another text to cross-reference and to confirm our version of the Mishnah? The Tanya. There's a brisa which says as follows: Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Shimon ben Elazar taught, Lo inechleku Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yeshua. There is no machlokes in the following scenario, which is also going to be the scenario of our Mishnah. There is a total agreement between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon. I'm sorry, Rabbi Yeshua. There were two babies. One baby is 7 days old, and so the bris is going to be on Sunday. And the other baby's bris is 8 days old, and therefore he's supposed to get a bris. I'm sorry, we didn't. Sorry, pause. Restart.
8 days old. The one that gets on Shabbos. The 7-day-old one was supposed to get
Shabbos, which means 8 days on Shabbos. The echad lamal achar Shabbos, the second baby is only 7 days old on Shabbos. His bris should be on Sunday. Bris and don't follow the Gemara schedule. And there was a mistake or a scenario of forgetfulness, and by mistake, the moil circumcised a 7-day-old baby on Shabbos. Everybody agrees shu chayiv, that the moil is chayiv. So again, a brisa confirms our Mishnah's version. Loi nechleku. There is a total unanimous agreement that our Mishnah should read chayiv. So there's a second text confirming Rav Huna's read of the Mishnah. So on what basis, or what would Rav Huna bring as an extra support to his understanding? A brisa that confirms his manuscript. Alman echluku, the brisa continues. Is there ever a debate? Maybe they're always agreeing, but that can't be. This is we're recording and preserving a Mishnah era discussion. Of course, there's a debate. We know there's a debate. Where is there a machlokes? On scenario B of our Mishnah, he's two babies. One baby whose 8th halachic day is on Erev Shabbos. So on Shabbos, he's 9 days old. And one baby that's 8 days old on Shabbos, and he is the candidate for a bris. And there was a mistake. And the moyel did a bris to a 9-day-old baby on Shabbos. Shouldn't have been done. So here there's a machlokes. Elazar says the act you did was not a licensed bris. got to bring a carbon chatas. Yeshua Paiter, Yeshua says, hold on a second. I know that this is not the ideal. I know that we would not really lechatchila have the moil do the bris, but the moil is here to do a mitzvah, and this baby got a bris, which is a mitzvah. He should be off the hook. That's what Rabbi Yeshua says. And Rabbi Elazar says, no. Halacha is halacha, and he should not have had the bris, and therefore he has to bring a chatos. So what is this? A brisa that totally and absolutely confirms the version of our Mishnah. It's an external text. It's not the Mishnah, but it lays forth exactly the facts as they are presented to us in the Mishnah. Yes. Evyatar just asked a good question. And what are you trying to tell me that a baby that gets a bris on the seventh day, that's not on Shabbos? Let's say it was on Sunday. Is that okay? So the answer, Evyatar, is there's two issues at hand. There's the issue of the laws of Shabbos, and there's the issues of doing a bris properly. And so right now, today, our primary conversation is about the laws of Shabbos. And so for the purposes of Shabbos, we want to know, is there Chilul Shabbos or is there not Chilul Shabbos? But you're asking a very good question. Is there a consequence? Is there a penalty? Or is there a halachic step to correct doing a bris on the wrong day or early? And the answer is yes. Good point. That's a conversation we need to have. Right now, our Gemara is staying focused on the question of Shabbos. And so on a weekday, maybe the bris, maybe there'll need to be a hatafa. Or maybe, actually, we read in the Shulchan Aruch together, there have to be a hatafa there, some kind of prick to formalize that the bris is being done on the right day. But there's no melacha on a weekday, but on Shabbos, you're not allowed to do all the steps that happen during a bris were to happen to another part of the body on Shabbos, or a different day that's not the day of the bris, the 8th day. It's a melacha. It's desecration of Shabbos. It's prohibited. Reb Beryl, yes.
Rabbi, is it possible what's going on in the background here today is the responsibilities of the moil, that he better make sure, etc., no?
So that's a very good question, but I don't think that's the primary motivation behind this Gemara. Meaning the point of our Gemara is not to say that a moil is liable for doing something wrong, because we're not talking about a liability of ben adam l'makom, ben adam l'chaveiro. We're not talking about an interpersonal liability. We're not talking, I don't believe, about the moil's license. We're talking about ben adam l'makom, between man and God. Between man and God, if we inadvertently do something on Shabbos that we should not, there is a teshuvah process. Now, of course, to do something inadvertently is a whole lot less severe by many, many degrees of magnitude than an intentional sin. But in the Jewish tradition, even something done unintentionally, there is a teshuvah process. What's the teshuvah process? In the time of the Beis Hamikdash, if it was an avera that hadn't been done intentionally, there would be either a death penalty or karet. Then you would bring a carbon chatas. You bring an offering.
Yeah, but the reason I asked that is there seems to be no responsibility on the side of the parents to give the right baby to the moil to start with.
But do you remember what we discussed on Friday?
They have no chayav. They don't have to bring any korban, nothing.
We didn't go that far, although apparently so, because there is no such thing as agency. There's no such, you cannot, I cannot do a sin on your behalf. I mean, I could ask you to do a sin and you could do it. But halachically, in the eyes of Judaism, there cannot be a shaliach to do an avera. There's no such thing as agency. When it comes to doing something wrong, a person, the actor is entirely responsible. Now, maybe there is a sin involved in conspiracy, or maybe there is a sin. Alon,
Rabbi, you lost me completely. I am sorry. We are talking about the agency, and you are saying on the one hand that there is no such agency, that you cannot force somebody to make an avera on somebody's behalf. But what you are saying means that it's parents who are responsible, not agent, the mohel, because the
No.
mohel is just an agent of the parents who
Tolbert, you want
offers.
to ask him to stop? Unless it's like just 10 more seconds. Yeah, what I'm saying is that in halacha, you could be an agent to do a mitzvah. If I ask you to give a charity on my behalf, it could be my mitzvah. If I ask you to represent me in a...
Of somebody, make an offer to marry.
You can. But let's say, for example, if I say, Professor, do me a favor, would you kill someone for me? Now, I shouldn't do that. And I have my own liability. But the murderer in Jewish law is the person who pulls the trigger. Now,
so if
there is such a thing.
Just a moment. If you ask me to kill somebody, it's your responsibility. But if I follow your request, then it's my responsibility, isn't
Correct.
it?
Correct.
So what is your responsibility if you ask me to kill somebody and I don't? I don't see responsibility here.
So thankfully,
conspiracy to commit.
So that's what I'm saying. In the act, the actual sin is on the actor. And so obviously it's terribly unfair to conflate a moyel innocently doing a circumcision unintentionally on a baby who doesn't warrant it and a murder, right? Obviously there's really no comparison except you have an actor and a person that's fine. So I'm just going to throw something out just because it's crazy. I don't really need to go there. Hold on, Mark. One second. But let me ask you a question. This is a terrible question. I should be fired from giving a Gemara share for asking this. But Professor, if I ask you to kill a member of Amalek at a time where there was a halachic obligation to kill members of Amalek, then the question would be, who gets the mitzvah? Okay, that was a terrible.
That's a good one.
I think that when we talk about the crime or avera, we have to somehow distinguish between intentional and non-intentional sins. Just maybe using different vocabulary for delineate that. We are talking here about unintentional. The Gemara talks about unintentional situation, but all our examples are about intentional situation. It's totally different.
So, Professor, let me clarify, because you're actually making a good point. If I know it's a sin and you don't know it's a sin, then I would. So let's say, Professor, let's say I hand you a lollipop and I say, would you mind giving this lollipop to somebody else? You think it's a candy, but really it's laced with something dangerous. So then I am liable, but not because you're my agent. It's because I misled you.
I'm not liable for
But if
it's intentional, and chatas is unintentional.
So in this case, both the parent and the mohel didn't realize they're making a mistake. No one intentionally was doing something wrong. That's the point.
Right.
So in a scenario where everyone here is innocent, no one here is intending to do something wrong, the actor, the mohel, does not convey liability to the father. The father didn't know, but he didn't do it.
I can suggest another analogy. Instead of poisoning something or killing something, let's consider a situation when somebody just has a face dirty by a coal dust or something like that. This person has to wash his face. It's not a punishment, it's cleaning up. So when we talk about unintentional sins, it's like having a face dirty that has to be clean. The cleaning of the face is not a punishment. It all times it took the form of bringing a chatas. It was financial liability. Somehow they learned how to live with that. They had other ways to deal with poor people in this situation, but still it is not a punishment when we talk about
correct. I'm just talking about the conveyance of who has the responsibility to do the teshuvah. Teshuvah is not a punishment per se, although ultimately a chatas is a cost, and so there is but you're right. The spirit of teshuvah in a scenario of a unintentional thing, it's not that you're a bad person. There is a step of what we call teshuvah because something unideal occurred, but it's not that you're a bad person. Just like when my car skid in the snow. Okay, we're conflating too many different issues because there is such a thing as something that's totally out of your control. But anyways, yeah, that's a good example. And so I was just using the talk about murder just because it was a very stark and memorable example. But you're right. There's a distinction between so that's the point. If it would have, but here's where it's confusing, and this is why we're talking about this. If under normal circumstances, the baby needs a bris, and the father says, "Hey, Mayel, can you give my son a bris?" There is a mitzvah. The father's mitzvah is being discharged. The Mayel maybe is also involved in doing a mitzvah, but the father's mitzvah is being discharged because a mitzvah is the credit spreads around, but in Avera less so, and therefore ultimately the guy who did the act is the one we're trying to find out if he has to bring a chatas. Maybe the father should give him. That's another conversation. That's not really our Gemara. There's full tractates that talk about this question. Maybe the father should make a contribution towards this chatas even though it was unintentional, but he shares certainly the societal sense of blame. He shares responsibility for the events that unfolded, but as far as the chatas, it's the one who did the cut. Anyways, but let's go back to our Gemara. Our Gemara has a Mishnah with a version that reads in the first scenario chayiv, without difference of opinion. We have a brisa that records that indeed everybody agrees that you are chayiv in that scenario. And where does the machlokes lie? In the second stanza of the Mishnah. What is the source? What is the motivation that Rabbi Elazar has to say chayiv? What is the motivation that Rabbi Yeshua has to say pater in the case where the bris was administered to a baby who was 9 days old? Shneihem lo yilmaduha elo me'avodah zarah. Both of them are informed by a question of avodah zarah. Why? Because a chatas is also brought in the case of avodah zarah and more than that. Rashi. Shehukshu kol chatois shebatorah lechatas avodah zarah. Every time Jewish law warrants the bringing of a sin offering, there is an analogy, a comparison to the sin offering that's brought for avodah zarah. You know why? The chsiv. Torah achas iyalachem. The verse, the Torah says that there shall be the same law for a chatas of avodah zarah and all the others. The parsha shlach lecha anashim, parsha shlach kabe karban avodah zarah. So, being that the Torah explicitly says all sin offerings should be should follow the model of chatas of avodah zarah, therefore it is highly reasonable that Rabbi Eliezer wants to analyze if there is a responsibility to bring a chatas. He would look at avodah zarah, and Rabbi Yeshua too is going to look to know if you should be chayiv or pater to avodah zarah. And here we go. Rabbi Eliezer says, ki avodah zarah. When the baby was 9 days old, you bring a chatas, and we learn from avodah zarah. Ma avodah zarah, just like in the context of idol worship. Amarachamona loy save. You shouldn't do the act, which really means worship. But don't worship, don't act. Vichi ovid, the act was done. Mechayev, he is chayev. Hachanami, by the case of bris. Loy shna, the act was done. It should not have been done. You bring a carbon. I don't care if it's early or late. If the act oughtn't to have been done, you have to bring a chatas. Rabbi Yeshua says no. There's a very big difference. Hassam, by avodah zarah, you worshipped an idol. Lav mitzvah. There's no mitzvah involved in worshiping an idol. Hacha, by the bris, mitzvah. Look at the bottom line. Look at what happened after the fact. The baby got the circumcision. The baby needed a circumcision. The baby had a mitzvah. You did a mitzvah. That cannot be equated to Avodah Zarah where there is no mitzvah. So Rabbi Eliezer says, look at the facts. An act was done, chayiv. Rabbi Yeshua says you're reading it wrong. You're looking at it the wrong way. There's no comparison. Bottom line, there was a mitzvah done. That is not the case by Avodah Zarah. They cannot be equated. Let's read Rabbi Steinsaltz. Let's see if he gives us a different language that's helpful. Both of them, Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua, only derive their opinion from idolatry, which is where the Torah details the halachis of a chatas for a shogeg, an unintentional transgression. I know you're thinking, how could you do avodah zarah b'shogeg? Hold on. Rabbi Elazar holds the laws of every unwitting transgression follows of idolatry. Just as in regards to idolatry, the Torah says, don't do those activities. And when you do the activity, you're chayiv. Here too, there's an activity that oughtn't to have been done. You did it, you bring a chatas. And Yeshua says, no, read it a little different. When the unwitting transgression was not performed to fulfill a mitzvah, you have to bring an offering. Here, your intention is to perform a mitzvah. Therefore, you are patur. I could imagine the Rishonim having a good time with this Gemara, but I think we're gonna, hold on, give me 1 second. Hang on. Well, Rebbe, go ahead.
What if the scenario is completely reversed, which I could see, where the parents, for whatever reason, don't want to have the bris on the right day, but rather a day later because it's a weekend or whatever in these modern times, and the moil finds out? Should he say, sorry, I either do it on time or I won't?
You want to know if the bris should subvert the parents' will and give a bris on the wrong day without the parents' permission? No. The mitzvah is on the parents. The moil can't. You can't have like vigilante moils going around.
No, I know, but should the moil walk away, or should he say at the end the mitzvah is still a mitzvah? The kid will have a bris a day late.
You're saying, can a moil be party to doing a bris wrongly? What's the specifics? Is it a late bris?
Yeah, I could see modern people today would delay a bris for the weekend, so it's easier. Relatives could come. I mean, it's
the moyel should not advise to do a late bris, but even a baby that's late to have a bris has a mitzvah to have the bris. So you're not being party to a sin; you're being party to the mitzvah. What if the parents say, today is Sunday, my baby's only 7 days old, but it's terribly inconvenient. There's a ball game tomorrow. Let's do the bris today, early. That a moil can't do because there's no mitzvah to do a bris early.
Right. So this is the principle. A mitzvah is a mitzvah.
And where it gets complicated is there's a little bit of a machlokes of contemporary poskim. What do you do if the baby is at home and the bris is going to be at the baby's home? When someone's going to drive there, should you push off the bris? Yes.
I understand the moel shouldn't do the bris on the 7th day, and you said there's no mitzvah in it. Okay, but is there an avera in this?
Well, you're not allowing a bris to be performed in a proper way if you're cutting off the arla early. But I know we could find a scenario that would ask the question in a very strong way. God forbid, it's a time of it's in a place and a time where circumcision is illegal and there are no mohalim, and the moil came to town today, and the moil is doing undercover brissin. It's day 7. Either the bris happens on day 7 or it's not going to happen until next time the moil comes to town in 6 months. Then what do you do? That's a shaila. I don't know, but I suspect you would not do the bris on the 7th day. But that's a question we shouldn't have to consider, except we did have it in a different way during COVID. In the beginning of COVID, certain airports were not allowing people to come without a certain amount of quarantining, and there was a special exception. China made some kind of situation where the moil could meet the parents in the airport and do the bris. So what about then? So that's pretty close. There's a baby that's 7 days old. Can you bring the baby to the airport to also have a bris? And I believe the answer would be no, you're gonna have to wait till next round. But and this is not a halachic opinion, but I believe based on the simple reading of the Shulchan Aruch and the facts of how the laws of bris go, I don't think you would head to a bris early. You'd be denying the baby to have a proper bris by giving it early. I believe so. But this is not an original question. Rabbi Yeshua told us lav mitzvah. Let's take a look, and maybe we're going to close with this because I have to leave just a few minutes early to go to a bris. Talk of a bris to a bris. Halacha, Shulchan Aruch, Yeridea, Reish Samach Beis, 262, 262. Abiyatar, you're getting dizzy when we scroll through the pages? Okay, good. Shach. I'm going to find the Shach. Sifkat and Beis. So, no. Ein molin achatonet tzachama b'yamashmini leledasa. Here, you don't do a bris until neitzachama, sunrise, on the 8th day of a baby's birth. If we did a little early on the shachar, the Beis Yosef says you're right. All of day 8 could be a birthday. Ideally, you want to do it as soon as possible. Dr. Hammer is not here on today, but of course, this would be a good time to remind ourselves of a story he told of his brother, who was a rabbi, who was invited to a bris at 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock, and he arrived to the house at 7 o'clock, and everybody was still in pajamas because it was a 7 p.m. I guess it was a summer bris. Anyways, ideally you do the bris in the morning. Even if the bris is late, even a late bris has to happen in the day. What if you did a bris at night? You got to go ahead and do a damris. The bris during the first 8 days, the Rosh says your yaitza. Now let's see what the Shach says. So Hainu al pi mashakosov, v'darkei Moshe, etc. Varosh le'pli. So there are halachic opinions that say that you did fulfill the mitzvah within 8 days, which corrects what I said, possibly contradicts what I just said about waiting for an indefinite time. The adif toich ches me elo nimo b'laylat kan l'shem. This is the language of the Darkei Moshe. Aval adaiti yef shalomer kain kidemuchach lehedya b'menachis gabi had the kamar hasam Rabbi Elazar Shimon b'shitas Rekiva ba 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 ba.
So let me understand this. Hold
on. Okay, suffice it to say, it's a longer discussion. It's a bigger can of worms than I realized, but it is a shocking discussion, which again, I was incorrect when I initially asserted otherwise. The question that remains, a question that's a very strong question, which you need to talk to a qualified posek, is a baby within 7 days. You gave a bris. Were they mekayim a mitzvah? Was it a mitzvah? But this becomes a big question in our Gemara. Because our Gemara of Yeshua says, lav mitzvah. No mitzvah, it's not a mitzvah. So the question is it really lav mitzvah? So the Rosh says you did a mitzvah. Actually,
maybe because it's actually the two acts here. There's one mitzvah to do the bris itself, and one mitzvah to do it on the 8th day.
Dr. Samler, you're a big Talmud Chacham for suggesting that. Great of the great Achronim suggests your answer. That maybe there's two facets to the mitzvah. There's having the bris, and then there's a special mitzvah of doing a bris at the right time. And so here, the Beis Halevi. Beis Halevi, the great Rishkirov says that there's two mitzvahs of Mila. There's Maisa Mila that happens when you do the bris. And then there's a mitzvah to have the bris. So actually, no, I'm sorry. What he's saying is not what you said. There's other achronim who say what you say. He says there's two facets to the mitzvah. There's the act of the mitzvah, and there's the fact that from forevermore you have a bris. In the language, there's Einoi Arol, and there's the fact that you have Mila. And so maybe by doing the bris early, the baby is not an Arol. The baby does not have a foreskin, but you did not do the mitzvah of the administration of the bris in a timely way. So we need to revisit this. I actually have to run to a bris now. And so we're gonna have to cut it short. Suffice it to say, we opened a healthy and beautiful can of worms.
You sure you want to say you have to cut it short?
I have to cut it short. I am not the moil, in case you were wondering. All right, my dear friends, I do got to run. Shkoyach for being here. Wish everyone a wonderful, blessed day. And look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow. Maybe we'll continue this discussion.
Have simchas.
Shkoyach.
Have simchas.
Only simchas, yes.